Module 4. Hi, Joe Cerrone, CAD 116. Today we're going to look at Module 4, Chapter 4 in our basic AutoCAD course. And so I'm going to go through and do my quick review of Chapter 4 and then tie that into the D2L system and the D2L kind of tips and tricks. This chapter talks about polylines as far as our assignment that we will be completing. And the learning objectives for Chapter 4 cover basic circles, arcs, ellipses, polylines. And what a polyline is it's basically multiple lines that are treated as one shape, like a square or a rectangle or a triangle. And so those are considered polylines. And then polygons are kind of a subset or a form of polyline, because you could have an octagon or a pentagon, and it's again a number of separate lines treated as a shape, like a rectangle or a donut. And splines are basically curves. And so as we look at some of the exercises for this chapter, we'll look at things like creating polylines and then calculating out the mass properties like the area, or creating, this is actually used with what's called the sketch tool. So you can get some shapes that are curvy, and then this would be a spline. And when you work with splines, you have these different control points that we can manipulate. And this is just a graph with X data and Y data. And then under here, this is actually created with a polyline, and part of the exercise goes through how to change the widths. Nowadays we use line weights, but back old school, polylines were often used to have line weights. Like you can kind of see how these different shapes, and those are controlled in our layer properties. And so as we start to work with things like layers and line weights, and you can see this isn't active on here, but I could probably go to the object layer and then change the line weight from default to something like 0.5 millimeters, and then close that, and then whatever was drawn on that layer. And so I'd have to toggle that over to the object layer, and then that's going to have that line weight addressed to it. It seems to be glitching. Returning back to our chapter objectives. And so that polyline exercise works on multiple levels. As we look at things like basic draw commands, and so we'll cover circles, we start with the center radius option. And so the default is to click a point on the screen, and then as you bring the cursor out, you'll get a radial value. And this is what's called a polar, or a heads-up display that we use. And then the second point, we'll click the radius. But there's different ways to draw circles. And so if we go under the circle command, we have center radius, center diameter, 2 point, 3 point, tangent, tangent radius, tangent, tangent, tangent. And so what the book does is it goes through and gives you examples of how to draw these different circular geometries. And it's all pretty basic. You know, how do you toggle it over into diameter mode? Well, what you have to do is you have to either hit the pull down or you have to type the letter. And so if I go C for circle and then I designate the center point, it automatically is set up for center radius. But if I want to change it to diameter, I can type in the letter D. And I'm not sure why it's not showing up on the heads-up display here. So again, if I go C for circle and then I come down here, I'm just going to type D for diameter. Well, it's glitching, or I'm glitching. So center diameter, okay, would be where you'd have the center point, and then you'll notice that the cursor moves, but you move the cursor twice as much to achieve the diametrical value. Again, you know, how to use the center diameter tool and different draw commands, being able to use things like tangency points. And so these construction techniques also show you how to use things like O-snap. And so if I come back here to some of the construction geometry, and then if I have, let's say I have a couple of lines, let's make 3. And then I go circle, tangent, tangent, radius. I could say tangent, tangent, and then specify a radius, and let's just say 3. And that value is too large, so I'll need to do something smaller. So if I go circle, tangent, tangent, and then let's say 1. It's getting a little closer. If I go through one more time, and then I'll go with tangent, tangent, say 0.1. I'm just going in the other direction. And so, but it does give you an idea of how to use object snaps. And so if I go with tangent, 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 you'll see that as I hover, I get this glyph for tangent. As I hover, glyph, and it'll give me a little toolbar that'll tell me deferred tangent. And so that's the tangent, tangent, tangent values. And it's very good for solving mechanical problems or just layouts where you try to see what's going to fit and how it's going to work together. As far as drawing arcs goes, there's a lot of different ways to draw arcs, but primarily I'll use just 3-point arcs for arcs, and then other circular or radial geometry, I'll draw circles and then I'll trim them. So as we look at, you know, some of these arc options, what we're looking at is being able to come back here and then to draw an arc, and 3.1, 2, 3 works quite well because I can use that to do things like make an arch. So here I'm acquiring an endpoint, midpoint, and then I can manipulate those 3-point arcs with grips. And so I like the 3-point arc quite a bit. And then if I'm going to go look at some of the other tools as far as radial geometry, oftentimes I'll draw a line and then I'll trim it. And so I'll hit enter to make everything a cutting line, and then I'll trim off part of the circle, and that's how I'll construct arcs. I'll use circular geometry and then trim. Continuous option, not a real lot of content there. That just allows you to stay in the arc command. So as I'm drawing an arc, if I stay continuous, and so I'll go 3-point arc, 1, 2, 3, and then if I go repeat, that's kind of the same continuous option, and I hit enter, what it does is it picks up where it left off. So enter, 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 and it goes through a continuous mode. So there's a lot of these little techniques as you get better with AutoCAD for speed. Drawing ellipses. Ellipses are good for isometric drawing, and I used to teach courses up at NIU. One of them was called Pictorial Projections, another one was Technical Drawing. And when you work with a pencil, what you do is you basically use isometric templates to make things look three-dimensional. And so you have the ability to draw isometric circles, and you would use those for something like this, which would be a furniture plan. And then those isometric ellipses, they look circular as you draw them, but when you work with these isometric drawings, they don't allow you to navigate like you would. And so if I try to rotate this, it goes flat. But if I come back here to my views and set it for an isometric view, then that view is built specifically for an isometric view. Must be northeast, I'm running out northwest. Well, regardless, we can come back to the view at some other point. But the idea, and I think I just need to go with the top view, that's That's why I'm missing. So as you work with these, okay, if we were to put in like an iso ellipse, you could do something like that where the idea is that you would draw an ellipse and then one of the options would be for an iso ellipse. And so and here it is, iso circle. So we'll say iso circle, and then depending on which direction it is, and you go Control E, and I can switch and toggle the iso plane. And so I could come back here and then go back to iso circle and create a circle at this angle. And it has a tendency to look like a circle when we're working in an isometric mode. And so that's how we would use ellipses. And if you get into some of the courses like the CAD 134, we'll show you how to do that. But polylines are great because polylines allow you to do things like set the width. And so I can come in here and I can draw a polyline, and I can toggle the W option, and it'll give me wider lines. It'll allow me to do half width lines. It'll allow me to taper the polyline. And so the exercise for that, and to draw arc-shaped polylines, is like this, where I can come in here. One quick way, if I've drawn it with a polyline, is to modify it with the Properties command. So I could say Properties, and then as I look at the properties for the command here, I'm going to have the ability to change the width of the polyline. And so we can go and do things like that. So they've named it global width, and so if I change this to maybe 0.125, you can then see how that polyline width will be wider. And so this was sort of the predecessor before AutoCAD started using line weights, because now it automatically does that. And we'll talk about that as we get into other chapters. The supplemental material is so-so. They have you just go through, and as you look at it, you're welcome to go into it, but I prefer to have things that are more visually orientated. And actually this one's pretty good, and it tells you how the multi-line command will work, where it'll allow you to do like wall floor plans by setting the multi-line setting to be like 5 or 6 inches apart. But there's other tools for that we use as well. And so some of the supplemental material is okay. Polygons, again, are types of polylines, and so if we work with polygons, we can do things that look like nuts and bolts. And so we can go through and create these different shapes where we can go and add chamfers and rounds to existing polygons. And so if I come back here and I want to make a polygon, I can come in here to the Polygon command, and the first thing it's going to ask me is the number of sides, and I can say 6, and then it'll ask me for the center of the polygon. Inscribed or circumscribed basically means whether it's like inside the radius or outside the radius. And so when I talk about the radius, what I'm talking about is a circle, and then if I were to go through and do a polygon from the center of that circle, shift right mouse click brings the O snap, and then I can say from the center, and I'm not sure why I'm not quite getting that at this point, so we'll come back here and just turn on center. Center is on, and then if I say polygon, enter the number of sides, 6, center of the polygon right there. Circumscribed would go around the outside, whereas inscribed would be on the inside of that. And then you can put radiuses on other polygons automatically, and so it's a way of putting a fillet on by selecting polygons. So if I come back here to my geometry and I say, oh, this is actually a polyline, but if I wanted to say fillet, And I'm just going to type it in sometimes. And then I'll come down here and I'll say radius, and I'll say 0.05, enter. And then when it asks me to select the object, I can say polyline, and what it'll do is it'll put a fillet on all of those radiuses. And so it's just quick. Oftentimes machinists will have to round and break all the sharp corners because the CNC machines are so precise that if you make this on a machine, the corners are actually sharp, and so you'll run programs to break the sharp corners. Okay, you can go through and you can also specify an area. You can create donuts, splines, and I'll show those last couple of commands and we'll wrap this one up. And so if we wanted to do a donut, under the draw command, it's right here. I'm surprised they still call it donut. What's the diameter of the inside? We'll say 1, enter. What's the diameter of the outside? 2. And basically it just makes these tubular filled shapes. And then if we look at the spline command and we say spline, basically what it allows me to do is to click and create these curvature shapes, and then I hit enter twice to end it. And then I can actually go through if I need to, and I can manipulate these control points. And so the exercises within this are kind of geared towards getting you ready for three-dimensional drawing. The displays link is done with the sketch command, and so you can use the sketch command, sketch, enter, and then when you click, you have to be careful because that's what puts the pencil down, and wherever you move the mouse, the pencil stays down. So if I want to make a little island here, I can do that, and then as I get close, I go slow, click, hit enter, and that's the sketch command. And what it really is doing is making these mini polylines. And so as you learn to use the software, you can do things like make topographical maps. Okay, so that completes the Chapter 4 video review.